Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to share what I read for the latest round of the Queer Lit Readathon. In case you're new here, the Queer Lit Readathon is an incredible week-long event created by my dear friends Kathy and Rogan, where you read queer books. Their co-host this round was Beck from Mooney Reads by Starlight, another one of my wonderful friends. Kathy and Rogan run 2 full rounds every single year, along with 2 shorter versions called Queer Weekends as well, so all of their information will be included down below. I was able to read quite a few things this past round, so let's just get right into it. The first book I finished this round was actually my bound manuscript of Ander and Santi Were Here by Johnny Garzavilla. This is their sophomore novel coming out winter 2023 from Wednesday Books. It is a very queer, very Mexican contemporary YA story following a non-binary character named Ander who's taking a gap year after high school to focus on their art. They're building their portfolio as a muralist and street artist, and their family's way of supporting them is basically banning them from the family taqueria by firing them and giving their job to someone else. Ander happens to meet this new hire, Santi, and he's attractive enough to make them want to sneak their way into a few of his shifts, and the two begin to fall for each other in the process. However, even surrounded by so much culture, community, family, and love, their relationship is tested when Ice begins poking around the taqueria and Santi becomes a potential target. Because of that, the two of them may just have to fight tooth and nail to protect their hard-won happiness. Content warnings for xenophobia, ICE raids, and references to deportation, experienced racism, some underage drinking and drug use, and some sexual content. I don't want to say too much because I'm not trying to dangle this book in front of you that doesn't come out for another 6 to 8 months, but this was fucking fantastic. I thought Johnny could not possibly one-up themselves after 1500 Miles from the Sun, which is absolute perfection, but this book is also perfection, and I don't know how they did it. What I think I love most about Ander and Santi is that it's mostly a story about these 2 Mexican kids quietly falling in love with each other, and then the book just really makes a meal out of exploring all the joyous moments that come afterwards. That's not to say there isn't conflict or that the characters aren't facing anything serious, because they definitely are, but rather the whole thesis of the story is about learning how to recognize and value joy whenever and wherever you can find it. For example, when the story begins, we learn that Ander has taken a gap year and deferred their acceptance to this art school in Chicago, but they're supposed to finally go to Chicago at the end of the summer, which is only a few months away. So their whole summer is kind of tinged with these feelings of bittersweetness because they feel like these are going to be some of their last memories or experiences in Texas, most definitely as a teenager who's a little more carefree. And when it comes to their relationship with Santi, they feel like there's a designated endpoint. Even if their relationship doesn't end, things are definitely going to change when Ander goes to college, so the two of them are really trying to enjoy the time they have together and not devalue or undermine it just because their time is not infinite. There's also a really great conversation about learning how to take ownership and feel pride about the things that you love on your own terms. When it comes to Ander as a Latina artist, a lot of their artwork is grounded in their Mexican culture, their background, their community, and they often worry about whether they're just playing into what's expected of them and potentially putting themselves in a box. But throughout the story, they're learning how to take pride in their artwork, not as something that can be commodified by outsiders, but as something that is true and genuine and authentic, and as something done solely in service of their community and themselves. In the grand scheme of things, that's actually what I love so much about Johnny's work. It feels like it was made for me. It feels like a reflection of my heart and my home and my people in a way that feels real. I connect to their characters and the things they experience not because of the color of their skin, the food they eat, or the words they speak, but on a fundamentally deeper level of recognition that comes from what they feel, what they believe, the spaces they occupy, the relationships they have, and how they connect. The last thing I want to mention briefly is that I love the dynamic of Ander's family in this story so much. I love how they shit-talk each other, how they love each other, how they fight for each other, and I love that their family always uses the correct gender-neutral Spanish to refer to Ander, and they never misgender them or use the wrong words, even once. Obviously, this is not to say the story doesn't have any other potentially triggering content, but I so deeply appreciate how, in that respect, Johnny really made this story a safe space and created such a great example of how easy it actually is to use and incorporate gender-neutral Spanish. So I'm gonna stop because I could very easily talk for another hour about every single thing this book does right. I didn't even get into the celebration of the slutty Mexican NB agenda, the nuanced exploration of immigration injustice in this country, and the incredible insight into the difference between being of a country and of the diaspora, and so many more things. So many more things. This story is sincere, it's heartfelt, it's dynamic, it's romantic, it's hilarious. When I say this story has everything, I mean it. Johnny's also 2 for 2 when it comes to revealing what the title means in the book in a really special way, and I cannot wait for everyone to experience that. 2023 cannot come soon enough because everybody needs this book. Unsurprisingly, I gave it 5 stars. For the bingo board, this book checked off messy queers, romance, and seasonal vibes. Then I was able to fly through my arc of The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes by Cat Sebastian. This just came out on June 7th from Avon Books. It is the sequel/companion to The Queer Principles of Kit Webb, one of my favorite books of last year. It's another queer historical romp following the love story between two bisexual thieves. The story begins when Rob finds out something scandalous about Marion's marriage to the Duke of Clare, and he writes her a letter announcing that he's blackmailing her into keeping this secret, even though it's really so that he can bury his own secret in the process. Things happen, and Marion ends up shooting her husband and having to go on the run, and the only person she can think of to help her is the very charismatic and conniving Rob, who she then kidnaps. If it sounds like utter chaos, that's because it is. Content warnings for references to bigamy, death, violence, and gun violence, some allusions to PTSD, some explorations of having a parent with dementia, some references to past marital abuse and at-risk pregnancy, and some explicit sexual content. I really love this. I have such a soft spot for Kit Webb that honestly I wasn't sure how this book would compare, and I was a bit hesitant going into a second book in a series following different characters just because I loved those initial characters so much. But this was a truly incredible book. I'm also just glad I went from one book where I was laughing my ass off straight into another book where I was still laughing my ass off. The banter, once again, is top-notch. The characters are utterly ridiculous, but there's also a great balance between that element of satire and the characters being extremely well-rounded and heartfelt. They definitely make you laugh and have a lighthearted, flirty dynamic between them, but they're also fully realized people who are running away from their own problems and learning how to face them, both together and by themselves. Rob, for example, carries himself as this masterful, fearless rogue who can commit any crime and have the victim be thanking him for it afterwards, which is true, but he's also very lonely, and he leans into that easy charm because he wants to feel wanted, accepted, and liked. Marion, on the other hand, is very no-nonsense. She keeps very high walls around her and maintains very firm boundaries about how far she's willing to let people in, especially because she's recovering from this emotionally abusive marriage. So really her relationship with Rob is a long-form study in how to trust herself, trust other people, and trust that there are good people out there who will take her at her word and want her to feel safe and make sure that her needs are met. This is really just a super fun romp about criminals committing light crime throughout the countryside as they fall in love and try to run from their past, but much like the first book, there's also a lot of great messages about eating the rich. On a slightly different note, I would also like to say if you enjoy adult romances that employ praise kinks, you will definitely enjoy this. Without getting graphic, I would also like to mention that this story does such a great job of exploring queerness and queer relationships as being something that defies the norm, that goes beyond societal expectations, that goes against the grain and revels in that difference, especially in how this pairing approaches sex. Again, I'm not going to say specifics because I don't know what everyone's comfort levels are, but Marion is a character who has sex-related trauma, and she has a very different way of approaching intimacy in order to feel safe. I absolutely love how that was shown in the story, and I really appreciate how this romance centers and celebrates the experience of unabashedly queer sex. That's all I'm gonna say about that. This was great. I thoroughly enjoyed every single page, and I gave it a super strong 4 stars. On the bingo board, this one counted for LGBTQ+ history because it's historical fiction, as well as romance. Then I finally made some time to pick up Boys Run the Riot Volume 4 by Gaku Keito. This is the final volume, sadly, in the Boys Run the Riot series. The story is written by a trans mangaka, and it follows Ryo, a young trans boy who's trying to start his own streetwear brand with his friends. The story kind of follows their ups and downs as they try to launch this small business on their own, and as they work their way through self-doubt in order to fully express themselves and discover their purpose. This volume specifically contains content warnings for some violence and references to an abusive parent, as well as transphobia, dead-naming, and misgendering. I have read every volume of this series during a round of the Queer Lit Readathon, so it only felt right to end the series during this round. While I definitely wish there were more volumes, I can still say overall that I really and truly love this series. There's very little about this series I haven't already said, but I love how this volume continues exploring how these characters can find value in the direction of their lives and in their passion, especially as young people pursuing art. What I think this series does most brilliantly is parallel those journeys of Ryo and his friends trying to launch their brand with the way that Ryo understands, accepts, experiences, and expresses his own transness. With both storylines, the characters are struggling to get people around them, namely adults, to take them seriously and to respect those forms of expression as being valuable, real, and not up for debate. Again, with both concepts, there's this idea that just because you're young or you haven't had certain experiences, the choices you make don't get to matter. And that's simply not true. Even though they don't know everything and don't have all the answers, Ryo and his friends are unwavering in their commitment to this dream. They know exactly what they want, they're willing to fight for it, and they're not going to let anyone else decide or dictate their success. The clarity of their passion is not only energizing, but infectious. You want them to do well, you want them to make it, because they're definitely fighting against the odds. One of the main themes in this volume specifically is a reframing of the idea that lacking experience is inherently a bad thing. Instead of dreading the fact that they haven't established themselves, they realize there's even more value in how that leaves them wide open to so many beautiful, exciting possibilities that they might not otherwise be able to embrace or even recognize. That is the advantage that Boys Run the Riot has against its established competitors. Those brands, those people have kind of boxed themselves into a certain image or concept, whereas they're still learning and growing and trying new things. I really love that perspective shift, and again, how it sort of mirrors what Ryo is experiencing as a trans boy who gets a lot of pushback against his identity, his expression, and who he truly is. I will say that even though this is the final volume in the series, it doesn't really feel complete by the end. It feels like there was definitely more story to tell and not enough space given to tell it. There's a lot of loose ends that are trying to quickly wrap up before that last page, so in some ways, even though this is the end, it doesn't feel quite as satisfying as I was hoping it would, but I also don't think that's the creator's fault because it mostly feels like they weren't given the proper space. But even taking that into account, I think this volume does stay true to the overall trajectory of the series, especially thematically, which has always been what I love most. Overall, I would still consider this volume and this series to be an all-time favorite, and I gave this one 4 stars. For the bingo board, I believe this one only checked off the graphic novel space. Then I listened to The Many Half-Lived Lives of Sam Sylvester by Maya McGregor, read by Allegra Verzella. This is a YA murder mystery with some light paranormal elements. The story follows Sam, who is a queer non-binary autistic teen moving across the country and going to a new school because they were the victim of a hate crime / near-death experience. Their dad, of course, wants them to be safe and have a clean slate, but ever since that happened, one of Sam's self-identified special interests is to look up the stories of other teenagers who were killed before they turned 19 as a sort of trauma response. When they move, Sam instantly recognizes the house they've moved into as belonging to a teenager who died famously 30 years earlier under very mysterious circumstances. This kid's death has turned into a huge urban legend, and the entire small town is very hung up on what happened to him, especially because his death was ruled an accident and no one really knows the truth of what happened that night. Not only does Sam start experiencing some very strange things in the house, but they also meet their very cute, very queer neighbor at their new school, and she is equally as invested in figuring out what happened to this kid, so they decide to work together to find out. Content warnings for experienced misgendering and dead naming, explorations of bullying, harassment, and hate crimes, allusions to suicide and death, recounted instances of homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, some descriptions of overstimulation, sensory overload, and related self-harm, one instance of vomit, mention of public outing, references to past racism and parental death, and some references to an alcoholic parent. This was another winner for me. I just had a really great week and made so many good choices. What I enjoyed most about this is that it's more of a slow burn mystery that very gradually unfolds itself, but in my opinion, that prolonged sense of tension actually makes the story that much more compelling. The more Sam and their friends learn about Billy's death, the more questions the reader has, and none of the answers are glaringly obvious. And I think that's heightened even further by this very subtle paranormal element happening in the background, this almost haunting of sorts, that creates some really strange and unsettling moments. Especially considering how that paranormal aspect is never explicitly defined or discussed, that really adds to the mysteriousness of it and makes you constantly wonder where the story is going next. Another thing I appreciate about this is that it shows Billy, the victim, as being a real human who lived a full life and who was loved by so many people, to the point where this town is still very much rocked by his loss over 30 years later. The adults around Sam who knew Billy growing up are still very deeply affected by his death and visibly shaken whenever he's brought up, not only because they're trying to distance themselves from that trauma, but because their grief is still fresh. In a story like this, I think it would be all too easy to sensationalize this young person's death and make them very two-dimensional just for the sake of having a zany mystery to solve. But the author does such a great job of humanizing Billy and showing how solving his murder would have tangible, clear, emotional consequences. I think Sam as a main character is incredible as well. They have a great loving dynamic with their adoptive father. They're funny, they're kind, they're resolute in knowing exactly who they are, and overall I think they're just fantastic. I also really respect how this story centers Sam's autism, not only in showing how they experience and process the world, but also positioning them as the perfect hero for this story because, as they say in their own words, sometimes there are details or nuances that autistic people especially can pick up on that allistic people can't. That attention to detail, that hyperfocus as they call it, really lends itself to helping Sam solve this mystery, and I also love that they're not trying to solve this mystery just for the glory of it or for the sake of getting answers. Obviously, getting justice for Billy is a huge part of their motivation, but in so many ways, Sam is trying to solve this mystery for themselves. They're working through the trauma of their own near-death experience and trying to remind themselves that bad people don't always get away with bad things. In trying to find out what happened to Billy, they're restoring his dignity in a way and showing that his life had an impact, and both Sam and Shep feel like finding peace for Billy might allow them to find peace for themselves. On that same token, there's also a stellar friend group of mostly queer kids in the story that act as a found family of sorts. I loved the energy between them, the shared humor they have, and how you can really tell that they have each other's backs. But most of all, I love that this story explores and interrogates the concept of safety, especially for Sam, who as a queer, trans, disabled person can never truly feel confident in whether their safety is guaranteed in any given space. There's a really fascinating parallel there with the fact that Billy died in his own bedroom, which is most people's safest space, and how Sam almost lost their life because of a former friend who was also supposed to be a safe space. So really the story is about Sam realizing that just because they can't predict whether they'll always be safe, that's not a reason to resign themselves to unhappiness. Especially with the way they collect these stories about teenagers who didn't make it past the age of 19, they have to learn that there's a difference between respecting the fact that life is fragile and actively wanting to live it. Sam is learning that they need to give themselves permission to live, not only for all the people who didn't make it, but also for themselves. Safe spaces are not guaranteed, they're created. And that's exactly what Sam is doing in this new town with their dad and their new friends, and that also brings a really strong element of levity and joy to the story as well. My only small note is that I think the mystery aspect is more compelling than the actual reveal, not because it isn't plausible, but because it just doesn't have that gravity, that impact that I think you really want from the payoff in a story like this. But that's definitely not a make or break thing for me. I still really love this overall and would absolutely recommend it. I gave this 4.5 stars. For the bingo board, this one counted towards Ace Arrow main character because Sam is Ace, also neurodivergent main character, new to you author, and the free space, which for me was audiobook. This is what my bingo board looked like by the end of the week. I didn't make any bingos, but I did complete over half the challenges, so I think that definitely counts for something. If you also took part in the Queer Lit Readathon, I'd love to know what you read, or you can let me know about the last queer book that you read down below in the comments. But that is everything I had to share with you for today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.